Wisteria, energy, twister.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Wisteria here. I hope everybody is doing well, and obviously many blessings to you all. Mega love shout out to Team Damayan, Team Unity and Team Lawai. I loves you all. Anyway, this one's one of my favourites. The Little Folk in Essex. Do you believe in fairies? Perhaps you too remember sitting on the edge of your seat in the theatre as Peter Pan urged wee children to answer yes and save Tinker Bell's life. But ask the same question today and you might get a very quizzical look, though not necessarily in some parts of Essex, yet those that are still remote. Strange tales of unexpected encounters with spectral coaches, vanishing jaywalkers, malevolent witches, red-eyed black shuck. They seem quite unlikely, don't they? Yet they happened. In such places there are even reports of sightings of the little folk. Yes, the little folk. These are not always the delightful winged creatures seen in old-fashioned children's books. They are more likely to be small dwarf figures of a mischievous and, well, capricious nature. But members of the fairy kingdom, they undoubtedly are. Country people have always had an healthy respect for the little people, and with good reason. Fairies have traditionally been notorious for exchanging their own babies for human children, and mothers fearful of finding a changeling in the cradle would tie a sprig of rowan to the cot, or leave an open Bible alongside, even put a knife or a pair of tongs on the cradle if the baby had to be left alone. There are also tales of people lured away by the fairies to feast and dance the night away, but on returning home next day, as they thought, they found to their amazement that years had just passed on by. Years had gone. Although the polluted and traffic congested cities may be no place for fairies, stories will surface from the countryside, Ireland, Wales, West Country, which suggests the little people are still around for those with eyes to see them. I mean, there's stories of them everywhere, all over England. Literally every spot. An ancient farm in Cornwall. Yes, where Cornish piskies, remarkable they are, like the little brass models you buy in souvenir shops, they can still be seen. And when a new area of woodland was being established there, a myriad of tiny glittering fairies appeared, flying around the new young saplings in a shining cloud, touching the roots and branches as they were being planted to help them grow. In 1979, the Daily Mail reported an encounter between a group of Nottingham children and some gnomes in a woodland park. The children had been playing in the park. They were actually on their way home at dusk. They heard a tinkly bell, and around 30 little bubba cars driven by gnomes came out of the bushes. They were about half my size and looked old, said one 10-year-old girl. They had greenish faces with crinkles in them, long white beards. They were laughing in a funny way and driving over swamps near the lake. The children were frightened and hurried away, but the next morning they told their headmaster at school all about it, and he was convinced that they were speaking the absolute truth. A representative of the Fairy Investigation Society of Nottingham also accepted that the children's experience was genuine, as she had received other reports of gnome sightings in that very park. A narrow winding lane between green fields leads to the scattered hamlet of Broxted in Essex. There are some picturesque thatched cottages, a 13th century church, even a windmill. But nothing to suggest that this is one of those rare places in this day and age where the little people have often been seen. Here, local inhabitants have described how tiny gnome-like creatures have appeared at dusk, and sometimes in broad daylight too. At these times, particularly sensitive people have been sort of conscious of a strange sensation in the air, like quivering of invisible wings. Mr. S. John Saunders, who has written about this area in several East Anglian magazines, says that at one, Broxted farm tractors are repeatedly broken down for no apparent reason. Crops had withered, and sometimes tools and equipment have mysteriously disappeared, only to reappear a few days later. All mishaps attributed to unfriendly fairy influence. And one day while cycling there, Mr. Saunders was almost pitched off into a ditch by an invisible force. For a radio programme, he talked to a tractor driver, Keith Foster, who, with his sister Janice, had come upon a grimacing dwarf when they walked into an empty farmhouse, and which was the Broxted cottage. I wondered, were two local women had often witnessed fairies dancing on their kitchen table. Interesting story, that. Another local man, Bob Wallace, swore that the little people frequently watched him while he was at work on his small holding, laughing and teasing him until he threatened to throw clods of earth at them. And yet another man disturbed fairy folk one night in his garden and, apparently annoyed at being seen, they stripped his apple tree bare overnight. All kinds of mishaps in the Broxted and Tilty area have been laid at the door of the little folk, but local people have maintained an indulgent attitude to their mischief and find their presence more of a privilege than a problem. In Colchester in the 1960s, in Victoria Road, a local inhabitant noticed fairies playing around a fallen tree trunk in his garden and even managed to take a photograph to prove what he had seen. And in 1976, a Lawford lady had a delightful experience as she walked down a garden path. She was confronted with a tiny figure about a foot high. It was a quaintly dressed little old lady wearing a shawl and a bonnet and tiny button boots. She was holding a small posy of flowers in her hands, and both ladies stood for a while, eyeing each other, sort of face to face, but one taller than the other. The look on both the ladies' faces, however, was a surprise. But then, with a smile, the fairy-like figure rose into the air like a miniature Mary Poppins and slowly floated away, pausing en route to wave goodbye. Yet another sighting of creatures from the fairy world happened in 1982, the year I was born. I was born that year. Two little girls went to a playing field near Jaywick's Frobisher Primary School, and not far from Clacton. They were walking along to play in their camp in the overgrown ditch at the end of the field, when they suddenly noticed two strange dwarf-like figures ahead. These resembled little old men with long white beards, pointy hats, 3 feet tall, and they appeared to be digging a hole with old-fashioned spades. They'd obviously not seen the two girls, who stood watching. Quite scared by the strange spectacle, the girls slowly retreated and continued to watch further afield. At some point, the two gnome-like figures disappeared, although the girls did not actually see them go, and although they waited for a long time, the little men did not come back. Then the girls cautiously crept back to where they had seen the little men digging, and despite a search, there was no sign of any hole, but both were absolutely certain of what they had seen. Springfield Place near Chelmsford has a long tradition of being haunted by a hideous little dwarf, and in January 1946, the Essex Weekly News reported its reappearance. At the time, the building had been requisitioned by the Ministry of Supply as an hostel for girls employed by the Hoffman Manufacturing Company. Apparently, two girls sleeping on the top floor awoke in fright one night, complaining that something uncanny had touched their faces. It was discovered that this part of the building had a very good reputation for being haunted, and after the girls experienced the room they had used, well, they then kept it locked after that. As a result of this report in the newspapers, a letter was published afterwards from a Mary Petra, whose grandparents had lived in Springfield Place for many years. As she quoted from a book written by Lucy Petra, a relative who describes what an uncanny place it was, then with trapdoors, mysterious cupboards, high up on the wall that were never opened, dark passages and a secret underground chamber, maybe a priest hole. There was a large bedroom known as the Blue or Ghost Room. One night, Lucy's mother was looking after her baby, Nellie, who was restless due to the teething, and they went to sleep in the Blue Room so as not to disturb Nellie's father. The mother was awoken later hearing the baby chuckle and call out, "Funny man, funny man." She was alarmed to see a hideous little man standing with folded arms and his back to the fire, and instinctively pulled the bedclothes over her head. She then soon threw them back, however, got out of bed, but the goblin-like figure had vanished, although the baby was still repeating, "Funny man," and seemed to be very amused. Was it a ghost, some kind of goblin? In his Haunted Britain, Hippersley Cook suggests that it could have been an elemental. But in the view of the sightings of similar little characters in Essex, the Springfield Place funny man could possibly have been someone from the fairy world. A similar creature surprised the new owner of an old house beside Woodland on fringe of Capel St. Mary, just over the border in Suffolk. The house had been in a run-down and semi-derelict condition when a London barrister bought it, and he had enjoyed renovating it and bringing it back to a habitable condition. One weekend, he travelled there ahead of his family, hoping to finish a few things before his wife and children arrived the next day. He was quite late going to bed, but was soon awoken to hear his name being called. He got up and went downstairs, thinking that perhaps his family had arrived early after all, but there was no one waiting outside. Feeling puzzled, he just decided to go back upstairs. What else could he do? Upon reaching the bedroom, there was an open trapdoor in the ceiling in that bedroom where he'd been doing some work earlier, and he glanced up. He was stunned to see a tiny man sitting on the edge of the opening, happily swinging his legs to and fro. He was about 2 foot tall, dressed in a green shirt, brown leather breeches with braces, long stockings and boots, with a small trilby-type hat on his head. The barrister stared incredulously, and for a brief period the little man stared back, then suddenly vanished. The barrister was not the type of man to make up such a story, unlikely as it seemed. He swore that he really had seen what appeared to be a fairy book brownie or goblin, and the matter didn't rest there. When he made a few discreet inquiries in the area, he found that previous occupants of the house had reported sightings of fairies and hobgoblins, both indoors and out. But his neighbours thought them rather an odd lot. No one had believed their stories. So many quiet and lovely places have been eaten up by vast motorways, housing developments, supermarkets, shopping malls, and yet, from time to time, some unwary citizen finds himself face to face with something straight out of a children's fairy tale. Are they dreaming? Perhaps fairies and goblins and the rest have been there all the time, but it is only certain people at certain times who can catch a glimpse of them. Perhaps to be on the safe side, next time Peter Pan asks, "Do you believe in fairies?" we should join in with the children and shout, "Yes, yes, I do believe in fairies, I do." The end. Thank you for listening to that wonderful tale, and I like it a lot because it rings very true to me. I do believe those stories, yes, I do. Please hit that like, share if you can, and consider subscribing. Many blessings.
Wisteria, energy, twister.